Hey guys, I'm in a seminary class this semester, so I need to pick back up on this series and get some of my stuff done. In particular, what I'm going to do today, there's a book that I've been reading for enjoyment by Leland Ryken, and I've read him before, different books by him, but I'm reading a particular book for class, and I read ahead before the semester started, and I didn't fully finish it, but I did a lot of stuff behind the scenes. But now I'm having to do an assignment applying some of the stuff from the book. And so what I'm going to start doing is I'm just going to integrate it into this as we're going through that particular chapter. So let me make sure my sound is good. All right, we're good. Let me share my entire screen. And we'll pull up the book. It's called How Bible Stories Work. All right. Full screen. All right. So I'm going to be doing rap reading to get through this stuff fast. Actually, no. Let's do some structural stuff before we do the rap reading. Okay. So look at our table of contents. So we're going to be focusing on the preface, introduction, getting the most out of biblical narrative, the subject of every story, the embodiment of universal human experience. So we'll read this part here, and then when we get to the subject of every experience, we'll look at the substructure for that. But this is the preface for the series. And this particular series, just so you can see it, let me hit the information button. How Bible Stories Work, a guided study of biblical narrative by Leland Ryken. Leland Ryken is respected in literature in the secular and in the biblical realm. All right. So let's go ahead and full screen this series preview. This series is part of the mission of the publisher to equip Christians to understand and teach the Bible effectively by giving them reliable tools for handling the biblical text. Within that landscape, the niche that my volumes are designed to fill in the literary approach to the Bible, this has been my scholarly passion for nearly half a century. It is my belief that a literary approach to the Bible is the common reader's friend, in contrast to more specialized types of scholarship on the Bible. Nonetheless, the literary approach to the Bible needs to be defended against legitimate fears by evangelical Christians, and through the years, I have not scorned to clear the territory of misconceptions as part of my defense of my literary analysis of the Bible. In kernel form, my message has been this. To view the Bible as literature is not a suspect modern idea, nor does it need to imply the theological liberalism. The idea of the Bible as literature began with the writers of the Bible who displayed literary qualities in their writings, who refer with technical precision to a wide range of literary genres such as Psalms, Proverbs, Parable, Apocalypse, and many more. And I'm not really evaluating like genres and all that type of stuff right now. I got to get through this material. That's a whole nother discussion. 2. Although fiction is a common trait of literature, it is not an essential feature of it. A work of literature can be replete with literary technique and artifice with remaining historically factual. 3. To approach the Bible's literature need not be characterized by viewing the Bible only as literature, any more than reading it as history requires us to see only the history of the Bible. 4. When we see literary qualities in the Bible, we are not attempting to bring the Bible down to the level of ordinary literature. It is simply an objective statement about the inherent nature of the Bible. The Bible can be trusted to reveal its extraordinary qualities if we approach it with ordinary methods of literary analysis. To sum up, it would be tragic if we allowed ourselves to be deprived of literary methods of analyzing the Bible by claims that are fallacies. What then does it mean to approach the Bible as literature? A literary study of the Bible should begin where any other approach begins, by accepting as true all that the biblical writers claim about their book. These claims include its inspiration, its superintendence by God, its infallibility, its historical truthfulness, its unique power to infiltrate people's lives, and its supreme authority. With that as the foundation, of the literary approach to the Bible is characterized by the following traits. An acknowledgement that the Bible comes to us in a predominantly literary format. In the words of C.S. Lewis, there is a sense in which the Bible, since it's after all literature, cannot properly be read except as literature, and the different parts of it is the different sorts of literature they are. The overall format of the Bible is that of an anthology of literature. Two, in keeping with that, a literary approach identifies the genres and other literary forms in the Bible and analyzes individual texts in keeping with those forms. An awareness of literary genres and forms programs how we analyze the biblical text and open doors into a text that would otherwise remain closed. Three, a literary approach begins with the premise that a work of literature embodies universal human experience. Such truthfulness to human experience is complementary to the tendency of traditional approaches to the Bible to mainly see ideas in it. A literary approach corrects a commonly held fallacy that the Bible is a theology book with proof text attached. Four, a literary approach to the Bible is ready to grant the value to the biblical author's skill with language and literary technique, seeing these as an added avenue to an enjoyment of the Bible. Five, a literary approach to the Bible takes its humble place alongside two other main approaches, the theological and the historical. These three domains are established by the biblical writers themselves, who usually combine all three elements in their writings. However, in terms of space, the Bible's predominantly literary book, usually the historical theological material, is packaged in literary form. These traits and method of literary analysis govern the content of my series of guided studies to the genre of the Bible. Although individual books in my series are organized by the leading literary genres that appear in the Bible, I need to highlight that all of these genres have certain traits in common. Literature itself, en masse, makes up a homogeneous whole. In fact, we can speak of literature as a genre. The title of the opening chapter of the book titled Kinds of Literature. The traits that make up literature as a genre will simply be assumed in the volume in this series. They include the following: universal, recognizable human experience, concretely embodied as the subject matter. The packaging of the subject matter is distinctly literary genres. The authors use the special resources of language to set their writings apart from everyday expository discourse, stylistic excellence, and other forms of artistry that are part of the beauty of the work of the literature. What are the advantages to come from applying methods of literary analysis? In brief, they are as follows: an improved method of interacting with biblical texts in terms of type of writing that they are, doing justice to the specificity of text, again, because the approach is tailored to the genres of a text. Ability to see unifying patterns in the text, relating text to everyday human experience. Enjoyment of the artistic skill of biblical authors. Summary: a book needs to be read in keeping with its author's intent. We see from the Bible itself that it's thoroughly literary book. God superintended its authors to write a very thoroughly and wholly literary book. To pay adequate attention to the literary qualities of the Bible not only helps to unlock the meanings of the Bible, it's also a way of honoring the literary intentions of its author. Surely biblical authors regarded everything they put in their writings as important. We would need to regard those things as important. Introduction: getting the most out of biblical narrative. The appeal of stories is universal. In fact, one of the most common human impulses can be summed up in 4 words: tell me a story. During the course of a typical day, nearly everyone finds occasion to string together incidents and thereby tell a story. A typical meal with family or friends is an insipid storytelling session. We turn the day's experience into a story in order to cope with our difficulties and relish our triumphs. The Bible continuously satisfies the universal human desire for narrative. This was highlighted when Henry R. Luce, founder of Time magazine, said in the interview, Time didn't start this emphasis on stories about people, the Bible did. Although the Bible is comprised of dozens of literary genres, the dominant one is narrative. Even the non-narrative parts are placed within the overall story known as universal history and salvation history. A biblical scholar of bygone era rendered the oft-quoted verdict that the narrative mode is uniquely important in Christianity, starting with the Bible. We can assign this dominance and narrative in the Bible to at least 3 causes. First, it's rooted in the character of God, who is the God who acts. Second, biblical writers are preoccupied with history, and they overwhelmingly want us to know what actually happened. To record what happened is to tell a story. Third, life itself has a narrative quality, being comprised of exactly the same ingredients that stories possess: a setting, characters, plot, progression in time, and so forth. The narrative quality of the Bible is part of its truthfulness to life. The history recorded in the Bible exists on a continuum of which literary narrative is only a part. On one end of the continuum, we find the historical impulse to record the facts of what occurred, but nothing more. On the literary end of the continuum, we find events, settings, and characters presented in full detail and with artistry so that we relive the story in our imaginations and relish the storyteller's skill. The historical material of the Bible covers the entire continuum. The more fully a historical account is presented, the more amenable it is to the methods of narrative analysis that I present in this book. For this guided study, I chose a fully literary narrative. Within the category of the guided study format, it's required that I select brief narratives, not long ones like the book of Ruth and Esther, or the stories that Abraham and Jacob and Isaac and Genesis, though I have selected episodes from those longer narratives. I do not want this to conceal that the methods of analysis that I propound in this book are exactly the right ones to use with long biblical narratives as well as brief ones. When compared to stories universally, the stories of the Bible are a combination of the familiar and the unique. We should note the following traits as being distinctive to the Bible. First, the preoccupation with history rather than fictional stories, like Homer's Odysseys or Shakespeare's tragedies and comedies, sets biblical narrative apart. And keep it with the author's attention to stick with the facts. The storytellers of the Bible generally, but not without exception, write in a sparse, unembellished style. Their preference is for the brief narrative unit, even though these brief units might be strung together to form a composite long story. The presence of God as a character, supernatural events, and the most stories is another thing that makes it read differently from stories that we ordinarily read. As an extension of that, the pervasive religious quality of the Bible stories makes them different from stories generally. We can actually say of the Bible that it is a divine story that is also a human story. We would only rarely say that of other stories. We can also properly reverse the formula. The story of the Bible is a human story that is also a divine story. John Calvin was right when he said that the true knowledge consists of two things: knowledge of God and knowledge of ourselves, that is, people. The stories of the Bible give these two things. A summary statement may be allowed to Eric Auerbach, a literary scholar who wrote a famous essay comparing storytelling technique in Homer and the Bible, for which he chose the story Abraham's offering to Isaac. Regarding the biblical writers, Auerbach writes, the religious intent involves an absolute claim to historical truth. The Bible's claim to truth is not only far more urgent than Homer's, it is tyrannical. It excludes all other claims. The scripture stories do not, like Homer's, court our favor, but instead seek to subject us. However, along with these distinctive and sometimes unique features to biblical narrative, the stories of the Bible also share the common techniques of storytelling that have been used by all storytellers from time immemorial. All stories are comprised of setting, character, and plot. As storytellers use such narratives devices as dramatic irony and foreshadowing. All stories are built on the paradigm of plot, conflict, moving to resolution. Techniques and characterization are the same in the book of Genesis and the novels of Charles Dickens. A lot of harm has been done to people's ability to interpret the stories of the Bible by the tendency of traditional approaches to seal the Bible off in a world of its own. In this book, I have not drawn connections between the stories of the Bible and the familiar stories of English and American literature, but I want my readers not to suppress the correspondences that they see between the stories of the Bible and stories universally. We will see more in the stories of the Bible, and we will handle them better if we apply what we know about stories elsewhere in the stories of the Bible. A final preliminary is to note that while stories are not essays with logical development of ideas, there's a discourse level to any serious narrative. A good story does indeed entertain us, and it embodies human experience in such a way as to lead us to relive it along with the characters in the story. But a story is also intended by an author to convey a message. Further, the message can at some point be formulated as ideas. The literary term for such ideas is themes, generalizations about life. At one level, a storyteller tells us about settings, characters, and events. But fiction writer Flannery O'Connor made the provocative statement that a storyteller speaks with characters in action, not about character in action. If this is so, about what do storytellers speak by means of character in action? The answer: life, reality, truth. Summary. Because we read the stories of the Bible for edification, we tend overwhelmingly to place them in a category all by themselves. The first step toward a literary approach to the stories of the Bible is to apply all that we know about stories. Generally, a story needs to be read and analyzed as a story. The stories of the Bible are genuine stories, not something else. They can be trusted to reveal the unique religious qualities if we apply ordinary methods of narrative analysis to them. A literary approach will also reveal how skilled the storytellers of the Bible were at their craft. Okay, subject of every story. So that's the topic. The embodiment of universal human experience. So this is probably this is basically this would be read as the subject of every human story is the embodiment of universal human experience. Okay. Let's see if we're correct for some of the structure we got going on here. Hey, I don't want to separate that out. All right. Okay, so let's find out the main structure. How to see universal human experience in Bible stories. Okay. Familiar human experience in the story of Babel, Genesis 11, 1 through 9. Okay. Learning by doing. Okay. Final thoughts on human experiences and subject stories. And a summary. All right. Well, let's read the summary first and work our way back. Literature is life. The truthfulness that it imparts to us is especially truthfulness to human experience and reality. The stories in the Bible are partly mirrors in which we see ourselves and partly windows through which we observe life and around us. In both cases, the knowledge of the Bible stories convey is partly knowledge in the form of seeing life accurately. Okay. Now, what we'll do is we'll look at the first and the last sentence of every paragraph. A story has two components known as form and content. Okay. I've chosen to devote my first chapter to the often overlooked subject of content. I immediately need to guard myself against possible misunderstandings by knowledge or form or content cannot be separated. These are short paragraphs, so I don't need to do that. So let's go ahead and get the reading. All right, gentlemen, start your engines. The embodiment of universal human experience. A story has two components known as form and content. While the former is naturally emphasis and narrative analysis, I've chosen to devote my first chapter to the often overlooked subject of content. I immediately need to guard myself against possible misunderstanding by acknowledging in the long run form and content cannot be separated, and that there's no content without the form in which it's embodied. Despite this, it's helpful sometimes to distinguish between form and content. It is a truism that the subject of literature, whatever the genre, is universal human experience, concretely embodied. While this applies to all literature, it is particularly important for narrative. For one thing, stories more obviously than other genres embody human experience. Second, unless we have a firm grasp on the experiential nature of the stories, we will not see their relevance to life. In regard to the stories of the Bible, the traditional approaches tended to short circuit the fullness of the stories by quickly reducing them to a set of ideas. There is a whole further type of truth beyond the ideational, and it is this other type of truth that is the particular speciality of literature. We can accurately call it truthfulness to human experience and reality. Drawing an analogy between a photograph and a work of literature will clarify this. A photograph puts a picture of life before us. It prompts us to stare at the photographer's slice of life. As we stare at it, we come to see the selected sphere of life with heightened clarity. This is true of literature as well. The knowledge that literature imparts is knowledge in the form of right seeing. How to see universal human experience in Bible stories. The best methodology for seeing recognizable human experience in the stories of the Bible is simply the conviction that the stories embody familiar human experience. If we are committed to the idea that the story of Jacob, for example, is filled with experiences of everyday life, we will be able to see and name them. But a few time-honored methods will help the process of seeing ourselves and our experiences in the stories of the Bible. One of them is the concept of building bridges between the ancient biblical story and our own world. Bridging the gap is the familiar term for this process. The gap between ourselves and the stories of the Bible requires us to take a two-way journey. First, we need to travel from our own time and place to the world of the story. Paradoxically, the more thoroughly we immerse ourselves in the world of the ancient text, the more likely we are to see recognizable human experience in it. After we have traveled to the world of the story and lived in it, we need to make a return trip. When we do so, we bridge the gap, the full range of familiar experiences, the menu of possible links between the story and our own experience. What is particularly required, and the ability to name the experience of the biblical story in terms of which we are familiar. An additional piece of information will aid the process. We need to grasp the difference between literary discourse and expository discourse. Expository discourse is information and explanatory. It's the language in which we conduct most of our everyday business. A textbook and news story are examples of expository discourse. By contrast, literary discourse aims to embody, image forth human experience, while expository discourse relies on generalization, abstractions, accumulations of facts. Literary discourse uses ranges of techniques to incarnate human experience as concretely as possible. With literature, we do not assimilate facts and ideas, but vicariously relive the experiences that the author places before us. It may appear that we have strayed from the topic of finding recognizable human experience in the stories of the Bible, but we are not. The reason we can find an abundance of universal human experience in the stories of the Bible is that the storyteller has incarnated and embodied the content of the story in pictures, image, characters, and events. It is a truism that history books and the daily news tell us what happened, whereas literature tells us what happens. American poet Ezra Pound famously quipped, "The literature is news that stays news." The permanence of literature comes from an author's concrete portrayal of human experience. Familiar human experience in the story of Babel, Genesis 11, 1 and 9. Hey, Matthew Ken McQueen. Okay. If you think the Bible is full of deception, then you have no reason to be here. Bye. All right, moving on. Contrary to what may think, ancient or primitive literature like the book of Genesis and classical mythology has an uncanny ability to embody universal human experiences that, if viewed in a certain way, are up to date as the daily paper. And by the way, if you're not a Christian, if you believe that Jesus Christ is God, Savior, the one that died on the cross for your sins and resurrected and promises give you eternal life when you believe in him, then you're eternally secure and you're saved. If not, well, you know the rest. Now the whole earth had one language and the same words, and as people migrated from the east, they found a plain in the land of Shinar and settled there. And they said to one another, "Come, let us make bricks and burn them thoroughly." And they had bricks for stone and bitumen for mortar. Then they said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower in its tops of heaven. Let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be dispersed over the face of the whole earth." And the Lord came down to the city and the tower where the children of man had built. And the Lord said, "Behold, they are one people. They have all one language, and is only the beginning of what they would do, and that they propose will now be impossible for them. Come, let us go down and there confuse the language, so that they may not understand one another's speech." So the Lord dispersed them from over the face of the earth, and they left off building the city. Therefore its name was called Babel, because the Lord confused the language of all the earth. And for there the Lord dispersed them over the face of all the earth. We could properly begin with a bit of context. The first 11 chapters of Genesis are primeval history, so far back to the dawn of human life on earth that it's some sense before ordinary history, hence known as prehistory. The story patterns in the chapters are elemental and simplified. We might think that such stories are unlikely candidates to yield pictures of universal, recognizable human experience. If we can find everyday human experience in these stories, we should be able to find it anywhere. Seeing our own life and times in the story of the Tower of Babel started by journeying to the world of the story and immersing ourselves in it. We cannot know with certainty what the tower looked like or literally was, but for purposes of the meaning of the story, any tower that we personally imagine will be sufficient. Building the tower was a gesture of aspiration to deity. The project involved a whole civilization in its conceptualization and then its construction. It was a product of human ingenuity and technology. Its goal was social unity based partly on single language. All of these things constitute the first half of the story. The second half narrates the defeat of these things. The keynotes are diversity of language, confusion, dispersal of population, abandonment of the building project, and a divided human race. Even in these broad strokes, we can catch a certain modern spirit to the story, but we can zoom in much more closely. And when we do, we're left feeling that we can hardly imagine a story, even much a longer one, that captures so much of our own civilization than this one. I have listed recognizable human experience below and will leave it to my readers to correlate these experiences with details in the text. Individuals and communal aspiration, the urge for human fame and achievement, utopian zeal and dreams, a spirit of independence, self-reliance and self-sufficiency, technology and faith in what it can achieve, the collective pride of the human race, the urge for permanence, the urge for material power, the city as the locus of human civilization, human inventiveness and creativity, social cooperation based on shared dreams and a single language, architectural feats, communal idolatry, finding security in the substitute deity, linguistic division among people groups, the abandonment of hopes and dreams. Later in this book, I will explore the discourse level of biblical stories, the way in which each narrative details embody a message. The key to that element in the story is that God judges the thwarts of human enterprise represented by the Tower of Babel. The story tells us about a failed experiment in living on a grand scale. But we should not be in a hurry to get to the abstract propositional themes of the story. Truthfulness of life is an important part of the truth of the story. The story offers us knowledge in the form of right seeing. To know that God disapproves of the qualities represented by the building project is a platitude, not therefore unimportant or to be scorned, but a platitude nonetheless. The freshness of vision that the story provides is to be found in its projection onto a situation remote from us of the very things that are going on all around us. This distance and simplified, these things stand out luminous before us. Stories, including those in the Bible, function by first removing us from our own time and place, and then when we reflect and analyze, send us back to our own world with a sharper sense of understanding. Learning by doing. So it gives the example of Cain. The story of Cain, Genesis 4:1-16, takes us even farther back in human history than the story of the Tower of Babel does. Yet it's hard to find any story in the world that captures so much familiar human experience per line as the story. American novelist John Steinbeck was so impressed by the universal aspect of the story that he wrote as follows about it. I think this is the best known story in the world because it is everybody's story. I think it's a symbol story for the human soul. This old and terrible story is important because it's the chart of the soul, east to Eden. Here are tips to guide your analysis of human, universal human experience in the story of Cain. Okay, so we're going to apply these tips to a passage. I've already taken notes, but we'll do this real quick. Work your way through the story in sequence from beginning to end. For every new piece of data that the story puts before you, ponder whether you're looking at something familiar. Some of the experiences are global in the sense of extended to the whole story. For example, the overall story embodies the thoroughly recognizable experience of the destructiveness that comes from unchecked evil in one's life. Other experiences are embodied in a localized detail of the story, such as Cain's self-pity when God announced punishment. It is impossible to discuss universal human experience in the story without thinking in terms of archetypes. Archetypes are the recurrent plot motifs, character types, and images or settings that recur throughout literature and life. Examples are the problem child, the family farm as the setting for action, and the crime and punishment. Do not overlook literary categories since they too are familiar experiences to us. Examples of murder story and detective story. An important part of bridging the gap is phrasing the issue in terms of your own experience. For example, the story looks at a closer look to the daily news if we use the label domestic violence. With a head start represented by the foregoing tips, we should be able to come up with a list of 20 recognizable human experiences in the 16 verses that make up the story. With a little creativity, the list can grow to 30. If it comes up short, enlist the help of one or two friends or the family members. So there's the story of Cain and Abel, which y'all can read. Final thoughts on human experiences, subject of stories. All right. How important is the concept that the subject of stories is universal human experience concretely embodied? It is crucial. People who never see the point of literature are the ones who have never developed the knack of seeing real life in it. Without this connection, it's hard to see the relevance of literature, which becomes a diversion and nothing more. The religious reverence that people have toward the Bible only partly negates this common situation. For many of my readers, the new idea that I have put on the table is the concept of truthfulness of life. As an additional category, truth beyond ideas that are true. I can imagine that someone might feel the ideas are sufficient type of truth. This view is easily refuted. If ideas are all that matter, the writers of the Bible could have given us a list of ideas. Instead, they gave us a book that is predominantly more than ideas. Stories, for example, are poems made out of images and figures of speech. Compared to expository writing that gives us only facts or ideas, stories always contain what we might call excess baggage. Whereas history tells us what happened, a literary narrative fleshes out how it happened, not simply by accumulating details, but by getting us to relive the events with the characters who were present, usually in the order in which the events unfolded. Truth is experiential as well as ideational. The excess baggage beyond facts and ideas and stories, including the added dimension literature supplies. The idea and the story do not require this extra material, but the literary dimension does. We are touching here on the difference between expository, informational, explanatory writing, and literary writing. Teachers of literature and writing courses belabored the point that the task of literature is to show rather than tell. To show means the embodying concrete images, including the setting, characters, and actions in the story. To tell means to explain and generalize in an essay or news report. The same distinction is sometimes expressed by the formulas of literature enacts rather than summarizes. The command "you shall not murder" is an example of expository discourse. The story of Cain's murder of Abel incarnates the truth in a story that does not use the word murder and does not explicitly command us to refrain from it. The command tells the truth, the story shows the truth. Another dichotomy is to say the literature gives the example rather than the precept, or even if also states the precept, its main business to flesh out with an example. Summary. Literature is life. The truthfulness that it imparts to us is especially truthfulness, the human experience and reality. The stories in the Bible are partly mirrors in which we see ourselves and partly windows through which we observe life around us. In both cases, the knowledge of Bible stories convey is partly knowledge in the form of seeing life accurately. All right. Give me 1 second. I'm going to bring up my notes. I'm working through Samuel right now. Okay. And I've done a couple passes here, but I've also been doing summaries like this. And so y'all would just see where I'm picking up, like right here. All right. So David tells Saul and others not to fear since he's here to save the day. Then Saul said to David, "You are not able to go and get the Philistines, fight with them, for you are but a youth, while he's been a warrior from his youth." All right. Saul doubts David's ability. All right, and it's in the contrast of which is contrasted with Goliath. All right. Okay. But David said to Saul, "Your servant was tending his father's sheep when a lion or a bear came and took a sheep from the flock." All right. So I'm going to just call this David has transferable skills. 34. What a lot. David has transferable skills from shepherding, and his past experiences build his confidence. Okay. But Samuel is linked to Judges. So perhaps he thought God was the source of these victories too. All right. So David said, "Your servant was tending his father's sheep when a lion," and this is what he was doing whenever he went to the battle to check on his brothers. "I went out after him and attacked him and rescued him from his mouth. And when he rose up against me, I seized him by his beard and struck him and killed him." It's funny. It says that lions and lions have beards. It just sounds funny. He didn't say mane. He said beards. Your servant has killed both lion and the bear, and this uncircumcised Philip will be like one of them, since he has taunted the armies of the living God. Okay. So this basically is, how would you say this? This is a pre-fight talk. Let's do that. Pre-fight talk. Pre-fight talk. Like before a boxing match, before a debate, you know, all that. All right. But it would be like one of them. He's gonna, and I'm gonna change these words later, catch a body. Because he taunted God's armies. So it's the living God's armies too, which was in contrast to hey George Alexander, hey Real Hampson. Am I planning to become a preacher? No, I train preachers. And that's what seminaries do. They teach young ministers. That's why I have different people doing ministry on my channel. Yeah, so I teach teachers and I help preachers. I've tutored seminary students and all that. All right. Let me delete it. And David said, okay, so David is still talking here. He's still going off. He's probably talking more than Goliath did the whole time. And David said, the Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear, he would deliver me from the hand of the Philistine. And Saul said to David, go, and may the Lord be with you. It's like he said, vehicle deals, go with God. And you're thinking the person's going to death. Did David convince Saul? Or is this said with doubt? There's no indication of that, right? So, but I just want to record the two different ways that I can read that. May the Lord be with you. But I don't think Saul at this point, don't get me wrong, it's possible. I don't think Saul would have, he gives David the Lord's blessing. Ironically. Now watch what happens. So earlier, Goliath is described as being dressed, right? But now Saul's the one that gets clothed. Then Saul clothed David with his garments and put a bronze helmet on his head, and they clothed him with his armor. So Saul dressed him in his armor, like he was saying, you are too, you can't feel these shoes. You can't feel these shoes, perhaps. All right. That's more. Not, I want armor. Okay. How do I spell armor, guys? Yeah, armor. Okay. So that's 1738. All right. 39. David girded his sword over his armor, tried to walk, for he had not tested him, So for he had not tested them. Yeah. A comedy scene is a boy in a man's armor. It's never even wore it before, you know. Oh my goodness, why does it not like that word? All right. I can't, and he's like, David said, I cannot go with these, for I'm not tested. David took them off. Yeah, so it was not useful to him. All right, 39. He took his stick in his hand and chose for himself 5 smooth stones from the brook. All right, so he went with what he knew. David went with the weapons of a shepherd. He took his stick in his hand, chose for himself 5 smooth stones from the brook, and put them in the shepherd's bag, which he had, even in his pouch. And his sling was in his hand, and he approached the Philistine. All right. Then the Philistine came out and approached David with the shield bearer in front of him. So the shield bearer is in front of them. 1741. They approach for battle, yet there is a middleman. I know that means man in the middle, but when the Philistines looked and saw David, he disdained him, for he was but a youth and ruddy and with handsome appearance. So he looked down on David for being like, whoa, this just blows my mind, guys. Check this out. Like Dennis the Menace. And what did Dennis the Menace hang around with? It wasn't a sling, but it was a slingshot. Like, what, you can't even spell Dennis the Menace? I don't know how to spell Dennis, guys. All right. Oh my gosh. Dennis, I'll type in Dennis the Menace. Dinnis. That's why. That's probably the theme I'm going to go with. David as Dennis the Menace. Yeah, I'm going to put that at the top. David as Dennis the Menace. And I know I didn't spell it right. I'll fix it later. Dinnis. All right. When the Philistines looked and saw David, he disdained him. All right, we already said that. Ready with handsome appearance. Being like a cute Dennis the Menace. Let's do that. Cute Dennis the Menace. Thanks, Real Hanson. The Philistines said to him, said today, am I a dog that you come to me with sticks? And the Philistines cursed David by his gods. The bully asked if he's to play fetch with him, and he cursed by the gods. Okay. 43. The Philistine also said to David, come to me and I will give you the flesh to the birds of the sky and the beasts of the field. Man, he talking tough. The bully asked if he's to play fetch with him. He's cursed by the gods. Yet David stands on business and talks tough. No, I'm not going to write like this when I actually do this thing, but I'm putting it in my own language because that's the type of assignment that this is right now. You flesh of the sky, the beasts of the field. Okay. Then David said to the Philistine, you come to, all right, so David's still talking. David continues talking. I would guess that David's probably talking more than Goliath. Said, you come to me with a sword and a spear and a javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts or armies, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have taunted. So David continues talking, saying that he is taunting God. That Goliath is taunting God. He's still talking. Look at him, man. He said, this day the Lord will deliver you up into my hands, and I will strike you down and remove your head from you. And I will give the dead bodies of the armies of the Philistines this day to the birds of the sky and the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know that there's a God in Israel. All right. He's going to feed them to the vultures. He is going to feed them to the vultures. Until so that others recognize God. And that all the assembly may know, still talking. No, the assembly may know the Lord does not deliver by sword or by spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give it into your hands. So this is the lesson. Recognize God. All this assembly, it was a lesson to Israel about the source of military victory. Okay. 48. Then it happened when the Philistines arose and came and drew near to meet David, that David ran quickly toward the battle line to meet the Philistines. Okay. David's been running this whole time. 17, but this time it said quickly running. And this is in English, but David quickly runs. This is like when you're watching the beginning of Troy. Let me write that. The beginning of Troy. That's what it feels like here. When what's his name slits the his Achilles, or who was it? Anyway, I'll think about it later. He quickly ran to the battle line to meet the Philistine. Runs into battle. And David put his hand into his bag and took from it a stone and slung it and struck the Philistine on his forehead, and the stone sank in his forehead so that he fell on his face to the ground. So he threw it so hard that it got stuck. You know, it wasn't a bullet that went through him, but it was enough. You know, he put a dent in his head. Let's just put it like that. But it sunk down deep. No, let's put it this way. He took a he got off a headshot. Kill shot. All right. They found his face to the ground. Fell on his face to the ground. Almost makes it sound like worship. He got off a headshot and fell as if he was worshiping. Thus David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone, and he struck the Philistine and killed him, but there was no sword in David's hand. Yep, it's just like, how's David going to cut off his head like he promised, right? So then we see the next part. Then David ran and stood over the Philistine, took his sword and drew it out of a sheath and killed him and cut off his head with it. Then the Philistines saw that their champion was dead, they fled. Now, David cut off his head with his own. So this is interesting. David couldn't wear Saul's armor, but somehow he's able to use his sword. Maybe he would just picked it up, it's so heavy, and just dropped it on him or something. I don't know. Or maybe there's supernatural strength there. Okay, 52. The men of Israel and Judah arose and shouted and pursued the Philistines. They cut off his head with his own sword, and Judah chased them down. All right. The sons of Israel returned from chasing the Philistines and plundered their camps, chased them down, and plundered them. Then David took the Philistines' hand and brought it to Jerusalem, and he put his weapons, in his tent. David parades the head, but not the weapons. 54. Now, when Saul saw David, okay, so now we got a new section here. 17:55. Now, when Saul saw David go out against the Philistines, he said to Abner, the commander of the army, Abner, whose son is this young man? And Abner said, by your life, O king, I don't know. Saul and Abner didn't know whose son was David. This is interesting because there's parallels with Jesus, of course, but there's also the fact that Samuel already talked about the spear and stuff. We'll see that later on. I mean, not the spear. Whenever he would go play the harp. Now, when Saul saw David going out against the Philistines, all right, so this don't need to be a question. And King said, the king said, you inquire whose son is this. All right, so Saul and Abner didn't know whose son David was. So when David returned from killing the Philistines, Abner took him and brought him before Saul. The Philistines had in his hand. Dang. Son David was. Let's see. They found David holding Goliath's head. Sorry. It must have been a heavy head. Saul said to him, whose son are you, young man? And David answered, I am the son of his servant Jesse the Bethlehemite. I wonder if Saul knew that the Messiah would come from Jesse. All right. Let's see. David tells Saul who his father is. All right. Okay, interesting. That's really where it ends. Interesting. Okay. Now, let's see what we're working with here. The story of David and Goliath is iconic. It's some of the things I read. In the larger scheme of things, both characters function as champions for opposing armies. But now that's too upper level. I'm going to do something like this. Riken. Let's see. Let's give Howard Hendricks a shout out here. Howard Hendricks. List under 5 things to look for. Howard Hendricks list under 5 things to look for. Things, and I'll pull up this in a minute. Things that are alike, unalike, true to life. So let me show you what I'm talking about. I have the Logos book, but Howard Hendricks, 5 things to look for. Should be an image of a hand. Are you telling me no one's made the image of the hand? Seriously? All right. I'll do it this way then. This is probably the first book I read on inductive Bible study, Living by the Book. I read this probably 2007, I think, something like that. Anyway, true to life. 6 things to look for. Things that are emphasized, things that are repeated, things that are related, things that are alike, things that are true to life. Things that are true to life. Let me go ahead and go over this real quick for y'all. This is good. This is good enrichment. Things that are true to life. There are 2 central components to quality observation. First, you have to learn how to read. Second, you have to learn what to look for. We've seen 5 clues to look for when you open the Word of God. The 6th and final clue goes on the palm of your hand. Things that are true to life. The issue here is authenticity. What does this passage tell you about reality? What aspects of the text resonate with your experience? This is where you need to use your sanctified imagination. You need to look for principles. More of that in the next chapter. We always live in a culture that is dramatically different from the cultures of the biblical era, yet the same human condition that the biblical characters experience, we experience. We feel the same kinds of emotion they felt. We have the same kinds of questions they had. They're real, live people who face the same things, the struggles, the same kinds of problems, the same kinds of temptations that you and I face. So as I read about them in scripture, I need to ask myself, what were the person's ambitions? What were his goals? What problem was he facing? How did he feel? What was his response? How would be my response? These are good. These are good. What were we're going to copy these. And we're going to use these as writing prompts. All right. Things to look for that are true to life. Emphasize, repeated, related, alike, true to life. Often we study or teach scripture as if it was some academic lesson rather than real life. No wonder so many of us are bored with our Bibles. We're missing out on the best lessons of God's word by failing to pick up the experience of the people in it. Let me mention a few individuals that I think help us see the text in the realistic terms. What I love about the Bible is that it always returns me to reality. It never paints its characters with whitewash. If necessary, it hangs the dirty laundry right out the front window to tell me what really happened. Abraham. Let me get some more water. Excuse me. Abraham. In Genesis 22, God says to Abraham, take your son, your only son, the one whom you love, seed, and offer him up as a sacrifice. So Abraham starts walking up Mount Moriah with the son Isaac, who was about 22 years old. Isaac says to him, hey, Dad, we got the wood, we got the fire, but where's the sacrifice? Abraham knows what his son is to be the sacrifice. How do you suppose he felt? How would you feel? Moses was an incredible leader, probably the quintessential leader of all time, but he never get into the promised land. Why? Because he struck a rock twice. Numbers 20. One act of bad temper, he's eliminated from going in. How did that punishment affect him? How might it have made him feel toward God, towards life? How do I respond to the consequences of my own sin? Noah was a man of great righteousness, and a generation shot through with wickedness. He obeyed God and thereby saved his family from the flood. And yet the account tells me that he also got dead drunk. I think how was this possible? Where the scriptures paint him not as perfect individual, but as real, live person, righteous, honored by God, absolutely, but also failing, weak, and sinful. What insight does it shed on me? David, who we're talking about right now, right? Of all the biblical characters, King David is probably my favorite to study. He is brilliant and gifted in so many fields. He's almost an ultra competent individual. I don't know about you, but whenever I study a person such as him, I almost feel inferior. Not only is he a great warrior, but not only is he a great athlete, not only is he a great poet and a musician, he's also a great leader. He seems to have it all. He's the one person in scripture that God describes as a man after my own heart. Yet this choice, yet Yet this choice man of God is shot down in flames one day when he's home instead of out on the battlefield with his troops. It only takes one woman to wipe him out. What is the Spirit of God saying to us by including this tragedy in the narrative? What warning does it give us? What flags does it wave about our humanity? Peter. The reason most of us like Peter is that he reminds us so much of ourselves. Every time we want to write him off, we realize, good night. He's saying or doing exactly what I would have said or done. For instance, he's willing to take on 100 men single-handedly to rescue the Lord. Yet one servant girl comes up and he says, hey, weren't you one of the disciples? He kept repeating, who, me? I know you're one of them, she insists. Drop dead, woman, he tells her. I don't know what the world you're talking about. So finally she says, I recognize the accent. You got a Galilean accent. You were one of the disciples, weren't you? And Peter starts swearing and cursing at this young woman. When we back up and look at the incident, we wonder who is saying that. Why this man who told Jesus, you can count on me, but at the moment of crisis he failed, just as you and I might have. Peter was human. John Mark. John Mark is one of those characters that you're liable to lose because so little said about him. He starts out with Paul and Barnabas on the first missionary journey. They sail from the coast of Palestine over the Cyprus and then eventually to Asia Minor. And as soon as they hit the mainland, John Mark takes off for Rome. Later, Paul and Barnabas decide to take another journey, and Barnabas suggests, let's take John Mark. But Paul says, no way, we're not taking him. He fleshed out the last time, and I don't want to run the chance again. It's probably flaked out, but I don't know why it said fleshed out. The text says that they had a strong disagreement, that they parted company. It's not until the end of Paul's life that he writes, pick up Mark and bring him with you, for he's useful to me for ministry service. How in the world did John Mark become useful? It certainly wasn't through Paul. No, it was Barnabas who took him and developed him and made him into a person that God could use. There's a ring of authenticity to the accounts of all of these people that it's easy to miss if your eyes are not looking for things that are true to life. When you study the Word of God, make sure you plug it into real life. Then you would discover that the people in the biblical narrative are just like you and me. They're cut out the same bolt of human cloth. Well, there you have them, 6 clues to look for every time you open your Bible. What things are emphasized on your thumb? What things are repeated? Index finger. What things are related? Middle finger. What things are alike? Ring finger. What things are unalike? Little finger. What things are true to life? The palm. Is there biblical precedent for asking those questions? I think so. Consider Proverbs 20:12. It's the most audio-visual passage in the Bible. The hearing ear, that's the audio component. The seeing eye, that's the visual component. The Lord has made both of them. On the basis of this verse, your task is clear. Learn to listen. Learn to look. All right. So, I could start out like that. But I don't know if I need to. What were the person's ambitions? David's ambitions are not expressed in the text except an accusation is made by his brother. Okay. That he just wants to see the battle. The mission is not expressed in the text except for an accusation made by his brother. This shepherd boy entrusted with the same responsibility of Joseph This shepherd boy was entrusted with the same responsibility of Joseph. Okay. Shepherd boy was entrusted with the same responsibility of Joseph to look after his brothers. The difference is they are at war, and he is going back and forth delivering food. He runs fast and he looks like he is he runs fast, and he is described like a little Dennis the Menace. I'll put that in there later. Dennis the Menace, who faces the big bad bully, because the other strong men lost heart. Okay, what else I want to say? I just want to preserve my thought about this. So David's ambitions are not expressed in the text except for an accusation. Okay. All right. Goliath's ambitions was to defy Israel's armies as worship to his pagan gods. He prided himself in military and physical prowess. Okay. The other people, his brothers had ambitions. I don't know if it's ambitions or just or loyalty to fight with Saul. Who else? What other characters were mentioned? My ambitions as a rider with Tupac. His brothers had ambitions or loyalty to fight with Saul. Saul's ambitions was to do whatever it took to get rid of Goliath, as seen by all the people were saying he offered the one to take Goliath on. Okay. So, what were the person's ambitions? What were his goals? So, we'll keep this with David. David's goals are not expressed, but God's goal for David is, as he is providentially moved into position that results in him gaining favor with the people of Israel. Okay. What are his goals? Ambitions and goals are very similar. So I'm just going to put these are his goals. I'm just going to do something generic. I might just say goals and ambitions. What problem was he facing? Okay. David was facing the problem of being called by God and having to live as a shepherd while his brothers looked down on him and everyone underestimated him. Something like that. Goliath's problem, his problem was he was on the wrong side. Basically had the wrong God. His brother's problem, their problem is they are in battle and will die. Saul's problem is Goliath. Immediately, Goliath and the Philistines. All right. How did he feel? David's feelings of being underestimated are not revealed, but he comes off like Scrappy Doo. He is focused on defeating God's enemies. Hey, Ashley. David's ambition would be like to serve the Lord. Yeah, I think you're right about that. All right. How did he feel? Goliath? He felt like he was unstoppable. His brothers, they were worried, most likely, but mocking of David. Why weren't they saying, David, don't get yourself killed? You know, we don't see none of that in the text. We don't see them warning David to not get killed or something. All right. And then Saul, how did he feel? He felt afraid, desperate, and jealous after the fact. Okay. What was the response? All right. David's response was to step out in faith and run fast into battle. Goliath battle. I'll just use shorthand. Mocking. See, they're not the main characters, so and then Saul, maybe resignation. Not like he resigned, but resignation of the situation. Okay, so what was his response? What would be my response? Well, this is where it's interesting. Okay. So this is the type of class where I can be personal, you know, so I could probably start at this level right here. I was a runt, red-headed, freckle-faced geek. That would fight bullies. I was a runt, red-headed, freckle-faced geek that would fight bullies. Sometimes for the right reason, other times because of my own inferiority. I'm not saying this is going to end up in my paper, but I write this. Like when I was made fun of by older, is high school. This is just one incident. High school kids. When I was made fun of by older high school kids in front of two girls that had just showed that, well, it wasn't all in one day, that had just in front of two girls that had high school kids in front of that had just showed me the school in front of two girls. I fought them in the cafeteria. Something like that. There's lots of stupid stuff I used to do, but that's just one example. Okay, so yeah. So it's serious, but also comical, like Dennis the Menace. All right, so now you get the raw stuff, right? Facing your fears and all of this, but at that time, I did not have my faith built up, so I operated out of fear. Now we flip it. You could say something like this: the story of David and Goliath is true to life for anyone that has been bullied or mocked. David Goliath is true for anyone who has been bullied or mocked or has done it to others. It's easy to relate to the shepherd boy who starts out like Opie Taylor, Andy Griffith, right? Who starts out like Opie Taylor, running errands, but turns out to be as fearless as Dennis the Menace, who ironically carried a sling shot. And I know it wasn't a sling. Okay. The story in David Goliath is true to life for anyone who has been bullied or mocked or has done it to others. It's easy to relate to the shepherd boy who starts out like Opie Taylor running errands, but turns out to be as fearless as Dennis the Menace, who ironically carried a slingshot. Let's see. Okay. Trying to see what else I need actually in this. Let's move this stuff right here, because this is just to help me process things. So let's move this down here. All right. The story of David and Goliath is true to life. This one said the story of David and Goliath is iconic and true to life. The story of David and Goliath is iconic because it is true to life. Okay. Yeah, that's good. I mean, I need to work on the topic. There's more I want to bring in, but okay. That dealt with that. But it turns out it's ironic carry slingshot. In the larger scheme of things, both characters function as the champions for opposing armies. The Philistine army is taunting the armies of Israel. David believes that this is an attack against the Lord himself. But before the showdown occurs, we're introduced to Goliath being adorned for battle. In contrast, a young boy who checks on his brothers runs to the battle, is accused of spying on it, and eventually runs into it. While Israel, including Saul, fears, David is looked down upon by his brothers. So it don't flow, but I think what I can do is I can start bringing in the scriptural summaries, and that will help tighten things for me. So let's just do that a little bit at a time. All right. Okay, so two armies are gathered for battle. Let's just move this right here. 17, 1, 2, 3. Two armies are gathered for battle. Let's see here. Two armies are gathered for battle. The Philistine champion Goliath is introduced and armed for battle. Will Saul, a man of stature, face the giant? Okay, so I would say, like a summary statement, the chapter begins with two armies gathered for battle. Chapter begins with two armies. The chapter begins with two armies gathered for battle. Two armies gathered for battle. Chapter begins with two armies gathered for battle. The scene focuses on Goliath dressing for this battle. And later he taunts and how he or description. It's not dressing for battle, it's like a description. The scene focuses on the scene describes. Yeah, let's do that. The scene describes Goliath's adorned for battle and his 24/7 taunts. Now, I'm going to fill that in later. I'm just trying to get the idea. So let me go back to the text. Now the Philistines gathered the armies for battle when they were gathered at Sokoh and which belonged to Judah, and they camped between Sokoh and Azekah and the Ephraim. That mean Saul and the men of Israel but gathered to camp in the valley of Elah and drew up in battle array to encounter the Philistines. The Philistines stood on the mountain on one side, while Israel stood on the mountain on the other side with the valley between them. Then the champion came out from the armies of the Philistines named Goliath from Gath, whose height was 6 cubits in the span. He had a bronze helmet on his head and was clothed with scale armor, which weighed 5,000 shekels of bronze. He also had bronze greaves on his legs and a bronze javelin slung between his shoulders. The shaft of his spear was like a weaver's beam, and the head of his spear weighed 600 shekels of iron, and his carrier walked before him. He stood and shouted to the ranks of Israel and said to them, "Why do you come out to draw up in battle array?" And the come out idea was also what about the dog thing. I think that, am I not the Philistine and your servant to Israel? Choose a man for yourselves and let him come down to me. If he's able to fight with me and kill me, then he will become your servants. But if I prevail against him and kill him, then you shall become our servants of service. Again, the Philistine said, I defy the ranks of Israel this day. Give me a man that we may fight together. When Saul saw that Israel heard the words of Philistine, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. Okay, so I would break it right here. I mean, I think this now right here is a good indication of a break. So it looks like the chapter begins with two armies gather for battle. The scene describes Goliath ordained for battle and his 24/7 taunts. Okay, so we could say we could put the first part 27, 1, 2, 3, and then 4 through 11, and his 24 taunts that caused Israel to fear. Like I said, I'll polish this up later. The chapter begins with two armies gathered for battle. The scene depicts Goliath ordained for battle and his 24/7 taunts that cause Israel to fear. Takes care of that. The Philistines camping Goliath is introduced and armed for battle. Will Saul, a man of stature, face the giant? Okay, taunts the season of fear. Had not the author indicated that Saul was rejected, the question that would come to mind is, will Saul, who was known for his stature, face Goliath? Instead, this is irony, because Israel wanted to be like the nations and picked but a champion like them is not enough. I know this is rough, guys, but I'm just trying to get the thoughts out. And this is probably more like commentary now. I'll still preserve the thoughts. I probably won't use a lot of this because I don't think it's needed for this particular thing. All right. Let's see what we got going on here. The Philistines champion calls out the servants of Saul. The winner makes the other a slave. At first, he looks like he's only defying Israel's armies. Israel could go into slavery if they lost. All right. Okay. you're chipping me out, Ashley. Contrary to expectations, Saul, the champion Israel, was afraid of Goliath. This makes it unlikely that Saul will fight Goliath. That's kind of like saying the same thing I just said, but I'll preserve them both just so I can choose what to keep or what to merge or anything like that. Let's see this one. David enters the scene and we're reminded who his father is. 3 of his sons went to battle, so which one of them would defeat Goliath? Yeah, that's pretty good. I'll just keep that. 17, 12 through 13 for now. David was the youngest, and 3 of his brothers followed Saul, but David went back and forth tending his father's flock. I'll still preserve it just for flow, but I'm not going to need that. right. Okay, but I need to read this. So David gets introduced. Okay, so now David, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to trace the interchange, alternation between David and Goliath. Now, David was the son of the Ephraimite, right? So his son, David is mentioned, so we'll make him yellow, right? 3 older sons of Jesse. So this is all about David, 12 to 13. David, still David. David. Then you got the Philistine. So that's telling me there's a break. So let's just preserve that. Let's do 17, 1 through 11, and call it all about Goliath. All right. 17. 12 through 15. This is generic. I'm going to change this, but rather and say all about David. And then the Philistine is mentioned. The Philistine came forward mourning than even for 40 days and took a stand. So it's reminding of the fight. And Jesse said to David his son, take now for your brothers. Okay, this is interesting. This is cool, the way the narrator mentioned this. Let me tell you what I'm talking about. So, if we look at the taunting that's going on, right? Where does he say it? I defy... right here. He said, I defy the ranks of Israel this day. But earlier it said that he came out okay. That's interesting. So it looks like the story delayed the fact that he was going out taunting all this time. But right here, they came forward mourning and even for 40 days and took his stand. So this is interesting. David is introduced. David is introduced before the narrator points out how Goliath taunted Israel daily for 40 days. Okay. It's interesting where the narrator points out how Goliath Israel devoted 40 days. This reads as God preparing. This reads as God moving his, I'm going to use the word man because I don't even know if he was a man yet. Well, he could marry, so he was a man. His man onto the battlefield. His champion onto the battlefield. Something like that. So that's verse 16. I'll fix that later. Okay, for the Jesse said to David's son, take now for your brothers. So this is Jesse talking. He's given instructions. So 17, 16 through, nope, 17. Just say this. So take now. Okay, so he's giving them instructions. 18, 19. Yeah. 17 through 19. David is moved providentially. Let's just do something like that generically right now. Okay. For Saul and there, all men in the valley fighting. So David arose early in the morning and left the flock with a keeper, right? So David's working. David's moving. I'm sorry. 17, 20. David takes action. David left. So all this is about David. David, 22. As he was talking, he's hearing the taunt. But this is still, as he was talking with them, behold the champion of the Philistines. So look what's happening here. As he was talking with them, behold the champion of the Philistine Regatta and Goliath was coming up from the army of the Philistines, and he spoke these same words, and David heard them. Okay. So he's in earshot. When all the men of Israel saw the man, they fled from him and were greatly afraid. The men of Israel said, have you seen this man who's coming? Sure, he's coming to defy Israel. And then about the king, the rewards and stuff, and then David spoke. So David takes action. Look at this title. David accepts the challenge. So here's the point. The boasting of Goliath is kind of suppressed here. It's just given summary form of this. And it gives more description of them from the state of fear. So David takes action while the nation fears. I'm feeling kind of lightheaded. I'm probably going to stop in a minute. David spoke, men standing by and saying, what will be done for the man that kills the Philistine? And they had already just said that, right? So did David hear this and just repeat it? What's going on there? David takes action while the nation fears. Yeah, this is all about David. David takes action while the nation fears. Let's see. Then his brothers bring in drama. Okay, this now is probably a good place to bring in the conflict with his brothers. But I'm getting kind of lightheaded right now. So I'm going to stop, guys. I probably need to get some rest or eat something. Whoa, how do I have all these things open? Don't need that. All right, guys. Well, I hope y'all have fun. I'm still working on this paper. It's due February 1st. It's just a small paper, but I'm just showing you some of my processes that I do, So I'll go ahead and put these comments on the chat up here. Goliath wanted control Israel. So yeah. I really like in the new series. I hope it continues with this. Sounds like what my mom needs. Oh, great, Ashley. Yeah. Yeah, we're working on it. All right, guys, check out more content, old stuff, new stuff. It's all good. God bless.